Hello, and welcome to episode 81 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
As we were talking about the previous episode, we have all sorts of continuating fun things about Athens and Milos on the podcast today as we finish the Melian Dialogue.
We do want, before we get back into it, we want to apologize for not having an episode last week. We had every intention of doing it, and yet, as we would sit down to actually record, different stuff would happen. Um, I had something happen at my place that meant I couldn't record that day, and then Kevin actually had a work-related incident, which I know I'm as shocked as you are that Kevin was working, but sometimes it happens.
Let's hope it doesn't happen again.
Right. So we still have the second half of the Million Dialogue to go. We're going to start a little bit from where we ended off last week, just as a brief refresher. For those coming in, this is a famous dialogue written by Thucydides to reflect on the nature of power in international relations, which kind of makes sense to start thinking about as we're talking about Crossbell. And so the Athenians have been telling the Melians, you should let us conquer you, because if you don't, we're going to conquer you anyway, and it's going to be worse for you. You're going to lose the war. Your people are going to die. We're going to enslave you. But if you come willingly, then we can have a better arrangement. And the Melians are pointing out that this might not necessarily be the case. So, Kevin, I'll start off. I'm reading the Melians. You're reading the Athenians. The Melians state, but we know that the fortune of war is sometimes more impartial than the disproportion of numbers might lead one to suppose. To submit is to give ourselves over to despair, while action still preserves for us a hope that we may stand erect.
So, what's your interpretation of this passage?
Essentially stating that while the Melians are aware of the numerical supremacy the Athenians have, war itself doesn't always go that way. And because there is still hope of independence, and hope of being able to resist the Athenians, then the Melians should fight back. If they just give up, then they're already accepting slavery, but action still allows them to fight for the possibility of maintaining their independence.
And we usually see hope, especially hope in the case of adverse circumstances, as something to celebrate. This hope for victory, hope for escape, hope for life. What say you? We think of it in our culture as something good. The Athenians here, not so much. They say hope, danger's comforter, may be indulged in by those who have abundant resources, if not without loss at all events, without ruin, but its nature is to be extravagant. And those who go so far as to put their all upon the venture see it in its true colors only when they are ruined. But so long as the discovery would enable them to guard against it, it is never found wanting. Let this not be the case with you, you who are weak and hang on a single turn of the scale, nor be like the vulgar who, abandoning such security as human means may still afford, when visible hopes fail them in extremity, turn to invisible, to prophecies and oracles and other such inventions that delude men with hopes to their destruction. This gigantic paragraph has like three sentences. It's very convoluted, very complex, and it all boils down to the nature of hope is to write checks your mouth can't cash in the hope that something happens to salvage the situation.
Yeah, I find it interesting that the Athenians are pointing out that hope appears to be a good thing, but it actually leads to ruin, right? We have this um, line, but its nature is to be extravagant, and those who go so far as to put their all upon the venture see it in its true colors only when they are ruined. That here hope is an active force that leads people astray, that leads people into doing things that are actively worse for them. What do you think about that? Do you agree with the Athenians?
I do agree with them that can turn you down a path where because of the while you turned it down, a disadvantage in forces and strength and numbers, whatever, that made you rely upon hope over more, substantive defenses, aids, you have to rely on it to double down more and more as you go down this path. Thinking about Crossbell caught between two imperial powers, the unilateral declaration of independence that we get hints at the very end of the conference that the mayor is going to submit to the people, it's a desperate gamble and it relies, I think, a lot on hope. They don't see a way out of the situation as it is, even with the terrorist attack, maybe especially, but who knows with the essentially they hope the independence can make a new path appear that was not present at the time.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Crossbell itself, the only way that independence works, well, there's the hope that that it will just work, but it's also Crossbell relying on the international concepts of right and fairness, all right, which we had discussed in the previous episode as a defense that the Melians had brought up. Because if we're looking at the independence movement from a pure um, numbers military standpoint, Crossbell ain't got no hope. There is no reason to suspect that the Crossbell would be able to hold off an invasion of both Erebonia and Calvard, which we had talked a bit about in previous episodes how Calvard and Erebonia can be a counterbalance between the two, but that would not be the case here because clearly Calvard and Erebonia would cooperate in order to keep Crossbell down, which is what they're doing in that trade conference anyway. So, at least as far as I'm seeing at the moment, the independence gamble is danger's comfort, I suppose, and it might lead them to even worse physical damages. One thing in this passage that does not seem to be prevalent in the mind of the Crossbell decision makers, but I still find it interesting that Thucydides is bringing it up, is how this passage ends. He states, nor be like the vulgar who, abandoning such security as human means may still afford, when visible hopes fail them in extremity, they turn to invisible, to prophecies and oracles and other such inventions that delude men with hopes to their destruction. In other words, he's talking about how people, seeing no um, human means, by seeing no real means, material means to get out of danger, they start praying. They start thinking that the divine will intervene. Um, and what's interesting is that here Thucydides is bringing the level of the individual person to the level of international politics, which isn't always a one-to-one comparison, but that's what Thucydides is doing here. And two, we have an ancient text pointing out that people are turning to religion as a means of a comfort rather than an actual like, see, the gods are going to come in and operate. As a historical um, phenomenon, this text is interesting in that way.
So, what do the Melians have to say to this Athenian rebuttal why hope is not something to place your trust in?
Yeah, the Melian state, you may be sure that we are as well aware as you of the difficulty of contending against your power and fortune, unless the terms be equal. But we trust that the gods may grant us fortune as good as yours, since we are just men fighting against unjust, and that what we want in power will be made up by the alliance of the Lacedaemonians, who are bound, if only for very shame, to come to the aid of their kindred. Our confidence, therefore, after all, is not so utterly irrational.
I mean, is it really? Trust the gods may grant us fortune. Is that rational? Is that irrational? Jury's out. the alliance of the Lacedaemonians, bound if only for very shame, they have to know this is something the Athenians are going to reject out of hand. What is in the interest of the Lacedaemonians to come to the aid of the Melians? That's something that they would respond to. This entire short paragraph seems designed to talk past the Athenians, everything they've been saying for the entire back and forth so far.
Yeah, this is one where the Melians, I don't think, do a good job at rebutting the Athenians. This is a passage that when I teach it, I refer to as the boyfriend just does not recognize that the relationship is done yet paragraph, because the Melians just keep insisting, no, we're fine, we're just, we're going to win this fight because justice is on our side. The God speak might be metaphorical here, just a general, we might have as good fortunes as you, just couched in religious language. I don't necessarily see the
Yeah,
even
okay.
active divine intervention here, but certainly the assumption that the Lacedaemonians are going to help them is absurd. And the reason why it's absurd is that they should, by all rights, already be in alliance with the Spartans. They're not, right? And that's kind of the argument that they had made beforehand, that they're neutral. Why don't you allow us to remain neutral? And because they are neutral, there's no reason for the Spartans to help them. There is this kindred tie, this colonial tie, but that works both ways. The colonial tie should be pushing the Melians to having an alliance with the Spartans anyway, and they don't. So here, the Melians, I think, are kind of grasping at straws for things that could lead to their salvation, but ultimately don't.
I'm not saying that they expect Zeus to, literally come down and smite the Athenian fleet, but their worldview is such that they would need an immense amount of luck, of, the kind like, say, the end of the 7 Years' War when Prussia is almost defeated, and then bam, the Tsarina of Russia dies and saves Frederick the Great's bacon. Absolutely massive paradigm shift with what the Melians need. You may as well call it divine intervention. It's so
Yeah.
unlikely and so massive.
So how do the Athenians respond to this grasping at straws?
When you speak of the favor of the gods, we may fairly hope for that as yourselves. Neither our pretensions nor our conduct being in any way contrary to what men believe of the gods, or practice among themselves. Of the gods we believe and of men we know that by a necessary law of their nature they rule wherever they can. And it is not as if we were the first to make this law or to act upon it when made. We found it existing before us and shall leave it to exist forever after us. All we do is to make use of it, knowing that you and everybody else having the same power as we have would do the same as we do. I want to stop a bit here and say
Sure.
this is incredibly realpolitik. It's so, I don't want to say down to earth. That implies negative connotations. It's fascinating political theory. We have the power. Why would the gods favor you and not us? It could go either way. The necessary law, they rule wherever they can. We didn't make it. Others would do it after us. You would do the same if you had the power. It's absolutely cold, pragmatic, hard.
Yeah, I mean kind of it's a justification for their own domination by asserting, it is what it is. Did you ever read Donald Kagan's biography of Pericles?
I did not.
The reason why I bring it up, so Donald Kagan is a very important Greek historian. He passed away a few years ago. He's definitely part of like an older generation of scholars. He was quite old. You if you want to experience him, he recorded an entire class on Greek history that you can get through the Yale Open Course system. And in the beginning of his biography to Pericles, who is an Athenian general during the Peloponnesian War, the same conflict we're talking about now, He brings up that modern day people instinctively act as if violence and assertions of power are ipso facto bad, immoral. He rejects that premise. He states this is, a modern construction. It's not how people have thought for however many years. And in order to understand ancient politics, you have to throw away the moral objection to assertion of force and dominance. And I certainly agree with the last part where, in order to understand politics, you have to just accept that this is what happens. But there, he's, I think, clearly pulling it from this statement by Thucydides, where the Athenians just say, people have done it. People are going to do it. It's the way things are. We just happen to be the ones in power now, so we're going to follow through. I don't think that's a strong moral argument, but it is a strong factual statement, I suppose.
It is. And they continue on. Thus, as far as the gods are concerned, we have no fear and no reason to fear that we shall be at a disadvantage. But when we come to your notion about the Lacedaemonians, which leads you to believe that shame will make them help you, here we bless your simplicity, but do not envy your folly.
Bless your heart, little Melians. Bless your heart.
This is a blatant insult.
Yeah.
And it's not the most common to see it from Greek polis to Greek polis in Herodotus, in Thucydides, something so arrogantly dismissive. I mean, Sparta and Athens, they have more highbrow complaints and attacks against each other, but something this just insulting, it's not usual, not common.
Yeah, I mean it is not the case that we get you're stupid. That's what the statement means, right? You're
Yeah.
naive and you're an idiot.
The Lacedaemonians, when their own interests or the country's laws are in question, are the worthiest men alive. Of their conduct towards others, much might be said, but no clearer idea of it could be given than by shortly saying that of all the men we know, they are most conspicuous in considering what is agreeable honorable, and what is expedient just. Such a way of thinking does not promise much for the safety which you now unreasonably count upon. The Athenians are saying the Spartans are like us, not like you.
But man, I love this phrase in considering what is agreeable, honorable, and what is expedient, just, indicating that this is to the Spartans, to the Athenians as well, that it's not we will do what is honorable, it's whatever we want to do, we will call it honorable. We're not going to do something because it's just, but whatever matches our interests, we're going to go ahead and call it just. And that's something that happens a lot in politics, in which realpolitik, or actions taken in the furtherance of a country's interest are often couched in moral language. And we have to read past that, right? We have to, maybe something is expedient and it is just, but often what is expedient will be called just. And we need to be aware of that.
The Athenians are making a tier list: S tier, Sparta and Athens; F tier, Milos.
Sure. So the Melians respond to this, because they've just been called stupid by the Athenians. The Athenians are pointing out the Lacedaemonians aren't going to help you. It's not in their interest. And the Melians state, but it is for this very reason that we now trust to their respect for expediency to prevent them from betraying the Melians, their colonists, and thereby losing the confidence of their friends in Hellas and helping their enemies. So Hellas is another word for Greece rather, the entirety of the Greek world, not just the Aegean Peninsula. Um, Here, the Melians are stating that it is in the Spartans' best interest to help them, because if they don't, their allies in the wider Greek world will see that and kind of back away. And if you, this is kind of the counter argument to a statement that the Melians had made against the Athenians before, in which they told the Athenians that you should not conquer us, because other people will see how terrible you are, and then they will go to the Spartans. Where the Athenians are stating, we have to conquer you in order to prove to our own subjects that they need to stay in line. So the Melians are continuing to bring up this idea of actions against us have ramifications for the wider war. But now they're doing it in a way to argue that the Spartans will help them, which I don't know I don't think that really makes sense. What do you think?
I don't. And the only way it does make sense, Milo still loses. Because now they've shifted to don't attack us because of A, B, and C. Here it's a subtle, but I do think real inclination to, after you attack us and subjugate us and do whatever, here's the consequences. So it's almost a premise a priori of them coming the way to accept defeat, subjugation, whatever.
I don't think it necessarily requires them to be defeated. It requires them at least to be in the state of a siege, um, which we assume that the Melians are able to hold out at least a little bit on. But that's what the Spartan help would do. I don't think that it's necessarily stating that the Spartans will reconquer them. But if they are in a state of siege, then the Spartans can provide reinforcements.
Yeah. True, true. So Athens says, then you do not adopt the view that expediency goes with security, while justice and honor cannot be followed without danger. And danger, the Lacedaemonians generally court as little as possible.
The Melians state, but we believe that they would be more likely to face even danger for our sake and with more confidence than for others, as our nearness to the Peloponnese makes it easier for them to act, and our common blood ensures our fidelity. So, Kevin, what's going on here?
Right after the Athenians get done praising the Spartans, they have this very backhanded statement. Well, they don't do dangerous things if they can help it, and this is dangerous, which I think is amusing.
It's a little amusing. It's also, I think, a good point of like the Spartans might say nice words, but are they going to put their own men on the line? Are they going to put boots on the ground for you? I don't know about that.
It is generally true. Athens has a, I don't want to call them harebrained scheme, but they do have generally dramatic expeditions. Sicily, uh, Thrace, so on. Sparta had a much more. Sparta is the tortoise and the hare. They're more slow, conservative, methodical. They win the war, so
That helps.
maybe. And but again, Milos talks about the common blood as a reason for Sparta to intervene. They do gesture to how does it benefit them? If they would ensure our fidelity, and a bit towards expedience, the closeness to the Peloponnese, where Sparta is on the southern edge of that peninsula, makes it easier for them to act, but it's still not quite talking the same terms, the same ideas as Athens, even now.
Yeah, like the Melians seem to think that because conquering the Melians would be unjust, that the Spartans that it's natural for the Spartans to defend them or to come to their aid. And then therefore they can like bat away these little counter arguments that would make it difficult for the Spartans. In other words, their statement or their assumption is that the Spartans would want to help, and that if there's any reason for them not helping, it's because of outside factors that they are arguing away. Whereas the Athenians are pointing out that the Spartans don't want to help you. And so finding all of these reasons for them to help you are not going to get out or not going to switch the fundamental underlying fact that the Spartans do not want to help you.
Still, they do not see the world in the same way. And Athens hammers this home in the next reply. Yes, but what an intending ally trusts to is not the goodwill of those who ask his aid, but a decided superiority of power for action. And the Lacedaemonians look to this even more than others. At least such is their distrust of their home resources that it is only with numerous allies that they attack a neighbor. Now, is it likely that while we are the masters of the sea, they will cross over to an island? It's almost restating what they've said right before because they don't seem to think Milos gets it.
Yeah. It's just an elaboration that they've already brought up. But there are some interesting details that we should keep in mind. So, for example, the Athenians bring up such as their distrust of their home resources. This is something that we need to unpack for the audience because it's reliant more on historical facts than just like theory. The backbone of the Spartan economy is slave labor. They've enslaved surrounding populations, the Messenians, and somebody else, I forget whom, but to a lower class that we call helots. And helots do almost all of the farming. They do some fighting as well in the Spartan armies, but generally speaking, this is there's far more helots than there are Spartan citizens. And one of the fears that the Spartans have is that the Helots will rise up and rebel. And if the Spartans are not in the Peloponnesus to keep them down, then it's far more likely that the Helots will rebel. So any action that the Spartans are going to take outside of the Peloponnesus, they have to do with other allies because they have to keep a force at home to keep the Helots down. And so the Athenians are pointing out, like, look, you want the Spartans to abandon the Peloponnesus, sail to here while we control the waves to help you. This in no way helps Sparta deal with its core concerns, which is domestic security. And the Melians, I mean, we'll read what they say, but I don't think that they really have a good grasp on the importance of essentially all politics is local. Spartans have to be secure at home before they can act abroad. So let's see what the Melians say. The Melians say, but they would have others to send. The Cretan Sea is a wide one, and it is more difficult for those who command it to intercept others than for those who wish to elude them to do so safely. And should the Lacedaemonians miscarry in this, they would fall upon your land and upon those left of your allies, whom Brasidas did not reach, and instead of places which are not yours, you will have to fight for your own country and your own confederacy. To sum up, the Melians state, well, they can send other people, and even though you control the waters, they can still sail. And if they fuck up on that, they'll land somewhere else and they'll fight you there. So it's clearly going to work out my way. And they just keep finding arguments that get weaker and weaker and weaker. And this is a terrible argument, Kevin. This is just a stupid argument that the Athenians control the seas, therefore the Spartans can make it safely. That doesn't make any damn sense.
And we've shifted from protecting Milos to raiding the Athenian Empire and tributary allies. So again, Milos is not going. Sparta can do this if Milos falls. They can do it without any regard for Milos. How does this help Milos? It doesn't.
It doesn't. They have not made a good argument that defending Milos is in the core of the Spartans' best interest, other than this idea of they are related to us by blood, therefore their international reputation might be harmed if they don't help us.
So how do the Athenians respond to this, and how do they end the dialogue? Some diversion of the kind you speak of you may one day experience, only to learn, as others have done, that the Athenians never once yet withdrew from a siege for fear of any. But we are struck by the fact that, after saying you would consult for the safety of your country, in all this discussion you have mentioned nothing which men might trust in and think to be saved by. Your strongest arguments depend upon hope in the future, and your actual resources are too scanty as compared with arrayed against you for you to come out victorious. You will therefore show great blindness of judgment unless, after allowing us to retire, you can find some counsel more prudent than this. You will surely not be caught by that idea of disgrace, which endangers that are disgraceful, and at the same time too plain to be mistaken, proves so fatal to mankind. Since in too many cases the very men that have their eyes perfectly open to what they are rushing into, let the thing called disgrace, by the mere influence of a seductive name, lead them on to a point at which they become so enslaved by the phrase as in fact to fall wilfully into hopeless disaster and incur disgrace more disgraceful as the companion of error than when it comes as the result of misfortune.
Let's
This
let's stop here and just sum up what they just said.
this is complicated in English. I cannot imagine having to translate this from the Greek.
We did it together like 2 years ago.
Repressed it from my mind.
Uh, so the important thing to bring up here is that the Athenians are attacking the concept of disgrace. We can also render this word dishonor as it's done in other translations. Probably the Greek is like eiskrune or some shit like that. But in any case, what they're pointing out is that some people are driven by the idea of doing things so that they would not suffer disgrace or that they would not suffer dishonor. Um, and that has no place in the realm of real international politics and real military stuff. And so if you are operating under the conception of people should do things lest they suffer disgrace, you will find yourself to a bad end. And that because you have done that, then you will actually uh, be found disgraceful because you have made stupid decisions based off of a wrong conception of how the world operates. It's a, I mean, I don't like so much the postmodern, um, like social construction type stuff, but here I think it's a pretty good argument that um, ideas of honor and disgrace are social constructions that you have to recognize that they don't actually matter in order to avoid being disgraced yourself. Like the Athenians are uh, kind of anticipating sociology of the late 20th, early 21st century in this paragraph in a really fascinating way.
And again, it's all practical. It's all not mundane, but it's we're talking about realness of ideas and the unrealness of ideas. It's all again, it's cold. And again, this is the democracy.
Yeah, right. This entire time, it looks, there's a reason why when we read this, the Athenians sounded more like Russia than anything that we might consider to be a Western democracy. And I think that it comes out really well in this dialogue that just because you're a democracy doesn't mean that you are right and just all of the time.
Yeah, we have to remember this is the democracy, the greatest democracy of the ancient world until the USA, maybe the most famous, certainly, that is saying all of this.
So how do they continue on?
This, all this about disgrace, if you are well advised, you will guard against, and you will not think it dishonorable to submit to the greatest city in Hellas when it makes you the moderate offer of becoming its tributary ally, without ceasing to enjoy the country that belongs to you, nor when you have the choice given you between war and security, will you be so blinded as to choose the worse. And it is certain that those who do not yield to their equals, who keep terms with their superiors, and are moderate towards their inferiors, on the whole succeed best. Think over the matter, therefore, after our withdrawal, and reflect once and again that it is for your country that you are consulting, that you have not more than one, and that upon this one deliberation depends its prosperity or ruin.
I should teach this as a really effective conclusion to an essay. Because what did the Athenians do? They sum up their position, and at the end of it is a call to action. Like, we've had this discussion, you have given us no good arguments. Uh, it is really in your best interest to just submit and give us cash money without us sacking your city and enslaving your people. Think about that and come to me with an answer.
Thinking back to Crossbell and what Athens is saying here, do you think Athens, how would they respond to Crossbell? To the situation, to the Declaration of Independence? Would they be like Zamiria, Calvert? Would they do something different? What do you think?
I mean, if the Athenians were, say, in Erebonia or Calvert's position, I think instantly they would start mobilizing forces. They would probably cooperate with the other side, just given that's how the trade conference was going anyway. But just letting the Crossbellians state that they're going to be independent goes against every principle that the Athenians are pushing for here. They would urge the Crossbellians to consider the two proposals presented at the trade conference, pick the one that gives them more autonomy, the one that allows the CGF to continue to exist. It will probably be better. Um, and then to just put up with imperial dominance. Um, because at least in the short term, the Athenians are right that it is better to just give some money rather than to be enslaved. So what the Athenians are leaving out there is the long-term impact of that. So like this all comes to a little bit of historical background that the Athenians achieved their level of dominance by creating a web of alliances amongst the Greek islands and the Asia Minor to defend against Persia. This is you could see this as a something comparable to how like NATO was formed under U.S. leadership to combat the Soviet Union, right? Um, and the Athenians offered everybody in that alliance two options. Either you could provide ships, meaning armies, military resources, being an active participant in the fighting, or you could provide Athens with money, and then the Athenians would use that money to outfit their own soldiers, or for whatever else they wanted, as would happen a little later on. What ultimately would happen there is that most states chose to give Athens the money. They became That's what the term tributary ally means. And over time, they found that they did not have to invest in their own security because the Athenians were doing it for them, which then meant when they wanted to rebel against the Athenians, they couldn't because they didn't have the military resources anymore. Whereas those that did keep up giving military resource, that did continue to give military resources, found themselves at a much better position at the bargaining table with Athens. So the Crossbellians, I think, have an understandable desire to keep as much of their autonomy as they can because the long-term effect of just giving into Erebonia and Calvert are pretty easy to see. It's just going to be more domination and more domination. But I do think that in the short term, the Athenians here have a point that if you have an army banging down on your door, maybe in that position you just give up.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's read a little bit about what happens, because Thucydides gives us the conclusion, and then we can talk about how overall what the message of this dialogue is and how it relates to Crossbell. So the Athenians now withdrew from the conference, and the Melians, left to themselves, came to a decision corresponding with what they had maintained in the discussion and answered, "Our resolution, Athenians, is the same as it was at first. We will not, in a moment, deprive of freedom a city that has been inhabited these 700 years, but we put our trust in the fortune by which the gods have preserved it until now, and in the help of men, that is, of the Lacedaemonians. And so we will try and save ourselves. Meanwhile, we invite you to allow us to be friends to you and foes to neither party, and to retire from our country after making such a treaty as shall seem to fit us both." In essence, they're stating, look, we're not going to give in. We want to continue to be neutral. Please allow us to continue being neutral. Such was the
Does
answer of
not
the Melians.
work.
Which is poor?
It does not work.
No, it does not.
So Athens puts Milos under siege as they said they would. It goes on for some months, for some seasons. At one point, the Melians make a sortie by night, have some minor success, brought in grain, and what did the Athenians do? They took measures to keep better guard in the future. But they could not keep this up. Milos surrendered unconditionally to the Athenians. What did they do? They put to death all the grown men, sold the women and children for slaves, and colonized Milos with their own citizens. Complete massacre.
And the Spartans do not seem to help.
Athens was proved right.
Athens was proved right. The closest is that the Spartans do attack other territory that the Athenians have control over, which like no shit, they're at war. Of course they're going to. But it doesn't seem that the Spartans answered the clarion call to help their kindred spirits. Because again, why would they? They are not allied with the Melians. There is no tangible benefit for them to do so. Uh, Here, with the conclusion of this episode, I think Thucydides is hammering home the message that you're supposed to take away from the Melian Dialogue, which is you might not like the Athenians. Morally, they might be reprehensible, but in the nitty gritty, here's how politics works. The Athenians are correct.
In the immediate, I wonder how much we're supposed to read this knowing that Sparta's the one who wins the war, but also Sparta did not cover itself in altruistic justice glory by any means.
They did a little bit. I mean, the Spartans went around talking about how they were liberators of Hellas because the Athenians had become so tyrannical that they kind of marketed themselves as freeing Greece from the tyranny of the Athenians.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in this specific instance, with the siege
Oh
and
yeah.
and the fall of Milos.
I mean, I think also we're seeing here like Athenian arrogance continues to grow throughout the entirety of the work. Here is where it hits like it. I will say it. I don't think it actually hits its peak here, but here we're seeing where the Athenians have become so um self-reliant, not self-reliant, but so sure of themselves that they have no problem waving their dick around and dictating terms to the Melians. Here it works. Later, when they are trying to do the same thing to the Sicilians, which is they open up a new theater of war for like a small benefit that would only really work if they were successful in conquering Sicily. Their arrogance leads them to have many blind spots, and then that serves to be a turning point in the war. Their defeat as they tried to conquer Syracuse, um, in Sicily, not in upstate New York. I do think that Thucydides is trying to like foreshadow that the things in the dialogue that are true and correct about the Athenian position are later drawn out to such an extreme that they lead to the terrible decision making to do the Sicilian campaign, which we're not going to go through in this podcast. We don't have enough time for that. But we should just note here that the Melian dialogue is not just something that we should be talking about in isolation. It is an integral part of the rest of the work, and the rest of the work has as much to say about the situation than just the Melian dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. And then thinking back to Crossbell, what do you think? Lost my train of thought.
Well, actually, I
So
need to
I have this question.
ask your question.
How do you think the dialogue would have gone if Sparta was there? If there was a trialogue? Because as we've noted, this is not an exact comparison to the situation Crossbell is in.
Yeah.
It has some good parallels, but it's not exact.
So, well, I think how this would go would depend upon, to some extent, historical contingency. By that I mean, okay, the Spartans are there, but in what capacity? Are they there as just an ambassador? There was a Spartan merchant who, because of his kindred ties with the Melians, were here, but then the Spartans do not have any actual real life interest in the thing, so the Spartans are there to argue for their um, neutrality? Or is this a case where the Spartans see that they have the ability to gain a foothold on an island, and so therefore are there to argue on behalf of the Melians to kind of explore the advantage that Sparta would have for sticking with the Melians? I think I could see both possibilities existing, but neither happened. So it's difficult for me to say which one is more likely to be there.
Yeah, yeah. Both Erebonia and Calvert, they want Crossbell, and the trigger, not unjustifiable, is the instability at the end of zero. Without that, could the situation, the status quo, have continued indefinitely? On an internal level, could Crossbell have survived? And would the powers that be, do you think, have been able to let it just extend for the indefinite future? Because Milos says, well, let us be neutral. Let us continue as we are now. We're not taking sides. Let's have that continue. How much is this the long-term plan of the president of Calvert, of the chancellor of Erebonian? How much is them deciding, what, this is actually dangerous?
I do think that there's a sense of, I mean, I hate to use the word inevitability when I'm talking about history because nothing is really inevitable. It's all contingent upon previous decisions. But we have to keep in mind that both Erebonia and Calvert have these domestic problems, right? And we can even think about how the Spartans have to deal with their domestic problems. Um, to put it more in dialogue with the Melian dialogue, one of the reasons why the Athenians claim the Spartans won't come over is because they have to keep the Helots down. But the Calvardians and the Erebonians decide instead to bring their domestic problems to Crossbell and deal with it there, right? They are
Yeah.
aware that there will be a terrorist attack at this trade conference. We know this because they have positions, they have precautions in place to respond to the terrorist attack in a very targeted way. And this seems to, A, be designed to show the inadequacy of Crossbell's security. Crossbell was not able to prevent this attack, and the attack literally flew up to the building, and then they landed on top and went down. So, like, okay, they can't even defend their own trade conference in an adequate way. But then the Erebonians and the Calvardians show that they can. And so even without the events at the end of Zero, which is a pretty good case for, okay, the Crossbellians cannot defend themselves, they've manufactured a scenario at the trade conference itself to display how the Crossbellians cannot defend themselves. And so because of that, I think that the events of the trade conference would have happened whether the events of Zero hadn't happened, assuming that the trade conference would have been held at all. Because we have to remember that the trade conference is a vision of Dieter Croy, and Dieter Croyce becomes mayor because of the disgust that people have for the political establishment at the end of Zero. So you would have to have another reason for Dieter Croyce to come into power that is not contingent upon the events at the end of Zero. But that's more from the Calvardian side, I mean, from the Crossbellian side, rather than the Erebonian and Calvardian side.
I don't think we have enough knowledge about Calvert through until we get to Kuro to say to do as in-depth discussion on the internal political dynamics and how they relate to foreign affairs, which is unfortunate.
Yes. We will be learning a lot
But
more about Erebonian stuff as we get into the Cold Steel games.
I do think long term, a stable, neutral crossbell is to the benefit of Erebonian of Calvert.
Why?
Less friction, I think, in general, for directly neighboring imperial powers is good. Have crossbows separate them. If there's any issues, I think it's a counterbalance.
So, Kevin, I have a question for you. Um, so something that we have seen in this dialogue is that relying on hope is not good, right? It leads to terrible consequences. So I have two questions for you. One, how do you predict that the Independence Declaration will go? And B, what do the Crossbellians need to do to make it successful?
So, first off, I don't think Data is just relying on hope, the mayor of Crossbell. There's something. He's a businessman. Do they like taking giant unknown risks? I don't really think so. I think he has something up his sleeve to make this stick beyond hope. And I think it will fall into something shady because he is a very shady person and probably almost certainly a villain.
Okay.
So maybe he'll hold the leaders hostage, maybe he'll have some super weapon. I don't know. There'll be something to give this teeth. And what was the second question about the people?
Well, I didn't ask about the people. What I asked is, what do you think Crossbell as a state needs to do in order to make the independence effort work?
Make it more of a cost to forcibly take over Crossbow than the benefit. Let them rule a city of ruined ash, fight building by building, destroy any advantage, what makes Crossbell, and I
Kevin, I
don't
have no
see
idea
that.
what question are you answering? Uh, I
What
don't.
they need to make it stick.
Yeah, okay.
They need to make it
What
stick, yeah.
what I've asked you is, what does Crossbell need to do in order to, make independence successful? And your answer is to destroy Crossbell.
They need to be ready to destroy Crossbell, to save Crossbell. Make it known they'll fight building by building to make the cost of conquering and occupying more than the benefit they get now, that they would get, make the an independent Crossbell a more attractive product. And before I was so rudely interrupted, I was going to say I don't see that being a possibility without one, some unknown variable that Data Croy controls, or two, some massive sea change on the part of Crossbell to fight the crossbow. Because as we've seen throughout 1.5 games so far, there's a big malaise about crossbow. They're apathetic about the present and the future, the citizens. They don't trust in the institutions, and you're not going to get them to go fight to the last man without some, I don't know, maybe brain control, brainwash, mind control. I don't think that's realistic. You would have to be Dieter Kroll has to pull something out of his pocket to make the Calvert plans, the Erebonia plans, much more cost than they're worth. Otherwise, it won't stick.
All right. Are there any last things you want to talk about with the Melian dialogue and Crossbell before we call it for the day?
The big takeaway: the strong do as they can, and the weak suffer what they must. I think that is on display throughout Zero, throughout the first half of Azure. Crossbow suffers what they must. Will they continue to suffer? I'm gonna go out and say because I think Dieter's a villain, he can't succeed. So whatever ploy has to fail. So I think then I don't see how Crossbow can stay independent unless he succeeds, but for the game narrative he can. So I think they're gonna end I don't know, owned by Calvert, because I do know through playing Cold Steel 1, Erebonia falls into civil war, so Calvin probably swoops in and takes it over. I'm guessing. I don't know that certain though about what Crossbell the fate is. But yeah,
All right. Well, as you know, these are things that I cannot comment upon. We will see how they play out. Next episode will be the intermission, which I'm looking forward to talking about with you.
it's been hyped up so much, so it better be worth it. It better be everything I'm expecting of it.
We'll see if
Because
it.
you've said,
I've said that maybe I shouldn't have hyped it up. I think maybe taking stuff by surprise is often better. I had stated that we should play it close together so we can react to it. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that.
and that is extremely intriguing. I can't think of any other time besides obviously Store Door 15 when you bandied that out. Not even the Joshua big reveal in the end of FC.
Yeah. And I'll just say this. I wasn't wrong about Star Door 15, was I?
No, I just don't. Swear to God, though, if it's, I mean, I like Kia, I just don't find her that interesting as a dynamic character. She's static in a good way. She's learning to be a kid. That's good for her, but not so good to watch.
Sure. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions to the intermission. I think oh I'm not going to tell you what I think you're going to feel, but I have a very clear idea of how you're going to react at different moments.
I'm gonna go make a kebab and fire up the Steam Deck.
Enjoy. All right, man. I'll see you later. And thanks everybody for listening.
You too. No, fuck. Take that out.